Good afternoon. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Chantal Fuqua, and I am leading basically the IUSE initiative at AAAS. So I'm the current program director for that initiative. I would also like to thank my colleagues, Thomas Vecchio and Julie Kim, for also being here and assisting in the hosting of this webinar. So just to tell you a little bit more about our division at AAAS, this is actually underneath IC, basically. So this is um, inclusive systems, basically, or ecosystem for diversity, equity, and inclusion. And we just recommend, basically, if you would like to learn more about our programs in IC and just AAAS in general, to please check out the website at AAAS.org, or feel free also to check out the AAAS IU website for more information. And specifically, we hope that you enjoy this proposal preparation webinar. So this one is specifically focused on community colleges. This is something different that we have not offered the community before. Please, 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 if you enjoy this webinar or found it useful, give us that feedback on the survey after the webinar, or you can also access the survey, or once you receive the recording or receive the email, you can still give us your feedback. But we really appreciate that, so we can continuously think about how we want to improve the program and other programs that we can offer. Okay. So please note that the presentation is being recorded. You can find the recording and the slides. They'll be available on the AAAS IU's website. But also please note that the discussion, the breakouts, will not be recorded. So feel free to speak your mind and to ask, I would say confidential questions, or have, more intense conversations with your colleagues. You don't have to worry about that being recorded. We also have closed captioning if you do need that for accessibility. So feel free to click that at the upper part of your screen, basically, and you'll see that come down. And also, we're encouraging you to look at the resources that we have on the website. We actively have a blog. There are the recordings for the workshops, all of the recordings for the summer labs that actually happened last year are there. Other resources, specific resources related to lessons learned for COVID, and also the proposal preparation toolkit. And this webinar actually will wrap into the resources that are available in that section. So next, basically, we want to segue or to thank our colleagues from NSF for being here, specifically Ellen Carpenter, Kaylin Shea Owens, and then Michael Davis. And we look forward to their remarks on behalf of the foundation. So now I will segue directly over to Ellen at this time, and please let me know when you want to move forward. Just go ahead and say next slide.
Will do. Thanks, Chantel. Hi, everybody, and thanks very much for being here. My name is Ellen Carpenter. I am a program director at the National Science Foundation, and I am the lead of the Improving Undergraduate STEM Education Program, or the IUSE:/EDU program at the NSF. I'm here with two of my colleagues today, and what we'd like to do is very briefly present an overview of the IUSE program and a specific arm of that are related to STEM education at community colleges. So I'll be joined in a little bit by Kaylin Owens and Mike Davis. The slide right here gives you the two documents that really govern these two programs. So the Improving Undergraduate STEM Education Program is governed by a document NSF 23-510, which is a program solicitation. And then the two-year college program, which we call Advancing Innovation and Impact in Undergraduate STEM Education at two-year institutions of higher education, is governed by Program Description, or PD 21-7980. And I know as we get a little farther into the presentation, Kaylin will tell you a little bit about the distinction between those two types of things. Next slide, please. So we're going to talk very briefly about the two programs that are really specifically focused on STEM education at two-year institutions or community colleges today. I'll speak about the IUSE program. I'll give you a very brief overview of program goals and expectations. a very brief description of the tracks and levels of funding that are available within the program, what our deadline structure is, and some resources that you might find helpful as you're thinking about potentially putting together a proposal for this program. Kaylin and Mike will then do the same for the Advancing Innovation and Impact program. They'll talk about the goals, the potential outcomes of interest, and the approaches that one might use in thinking about these types of projects. Next slide, please. So the first question that I like to ask is, what is the IUSE program, or what is IUSE:/EDU? And I'm stealing a graphic already from AAAS that really talks about imagining the future of undergraduate STEM education. So I think that the IUSE program really is trying to imagine what the future of undergraduate STEM education could be, and trying to provide resources to the community to help us reach that future. So we are a core program of the National Science Foundation. We've actually are a program that's been around for quite a number of years that really seeks to promote novel, creative, and transformative approaches to improving STEM education for all undergraduates, and that's undergraduates in any institutional environment. So the program is open to application from all institutions of higher education, of course, including community colleges, to other four-year institutions, all kinds of institutions, as well as associations that are sort of associated with undergraduate STEM education as a whole. We place a high value on educating students to become leaders and innovators in rapidly changing and emerging STEM fields. And as we all know, there's lots of those fields, and it seems like the landscape of science, mathematics, technology, and engineering is different almost every time we look at it. And also for helping us to educate a scientifically literate public. The program supports projects that really seek to bring recent advances in STEM knowledge into the classroom, that help to adapt and improve and incorporate evidence-based practices, things that we know work well, into teaching in the undergraduate environment, and that hopefully lay the groundwork for improving the way STEM education is approached on an institutional level. Next slide. Chantel? Oh, there we go. So the program itself has three major goals. These goals are really to build knowledge about STEM teaching and learning at the undergraduate level, to really learn how we should do this, to help incorporate practices that are known to work effectively in undergraduate STEM teaching and learning, and to help build and understand the things that are needed to change an institution to adopt these kinds of practices as part of their organizational structure. Next slide, please. So what do we expect in our projects? Well, all IUSE projects are expected to increase knowledge about effective STEM education. And this knowledge can take the shape of many, many different things. It can be generated through a series of research questions. It can be generated through assessing project activities and impacts and seeing what effect an intervention has in a particular environment, be that a classroom, a division, a department, or an entire institution. And also that the findings that are found through work that is supported by the IUSE program, we hopefully would like those to find their way into the community. And that usually is through some sort of dissemination effort, whether it's publishing your work, whether it's writing blogs for AAAS as part of the series that they have going here, or other creative efforts that really can get your efforts out into the public view, where they can be adapted and used by folks at other institutions. Next slide, please. So the program is divided into two halves, really. One is called Engaged Student Learning. And so this is the arm of the program that really focuses directly on the students. And this arm really hopes to increase student engagement and learning through the development and application of new tools, resources, and models for STEM education. So thinking about things that could be designed and implemented in a classroom, a laboratory course, community-based science, things like that, and generating knowledge about how students learn in those different types of environments and in engaging with those different types of interventions. The other arm of the program really is working on the institutional level, and we're thinking about trying to help institutions and communities transform to really support STEM education in the best way possible. And this can include things like spreading and scaling up evidence-based practices, using perhaps a theory of change to as a motivating factor for what could drive an institution to move in a direction that could improve STEM teaching and learning, and also to help us understand what's going on in that process through generating knowledge about the organizational change process. Within each of these arms, we actually have a couple different funding levels that are available. In the Engaged Student Learning arm of the program, we have 3 different levels. So level 1 awards are available for up to $400,000 for a term of up to 3 years. Level 2 awards would support efforts in the $400,000 to $750,000 range, also for a term of 3 years. And level 3 awards would support efforts in the $750,000 to $2 million range for up to about 5 years. Institutional and community transformation projects can also span a variety of levels. We have a sort of an introductory level for institutions that really haven't thought about efforts in this area before. We call it our capacity building track, and that can provide funding in the range of $200,000 for a single institution or $400,000 for multiple institutions for up to a few years to help sort of organize an institutional change type of effort. Within that track, within that arm, we also have a level 1 award, which would allow funding up to $400,000 for up to 3 years, or a level 2 award from $400,000 to $2 million for up to 5 years of support. Next slide, please. The program features 2 deadlines annually. We actually have one coming up in January, and that would be for level 1 awards, both in the engaged student learning and institutional and community transformation track, and also for those capacity building proposals. This deadline is typically the 3rd Wednesday in January and will be maintained on that deadline for at least the next few years. For those institutions who've never really approached work in this area or supported by the IUSE program, this is often a place where these institutions like to think about starting. But I also want to say that there's absolutely no requirement that you progress in any order through the IUSE program. There's no need to have a level 1 award before you move to a level 2 or a level 3, for example. The awards and the levels and the funding really are dependent on the scale and the scope of the project you're proposing and really don't relate to each other or any sort of progression through the program. The second programmatic deadline for us is in July, and that's when we will accept level 2 and level 3 proposals. So there's one deadline a year for the level 1 and capacity building proposals, and a second deadline for the level 2 and level 3 proposals. Next slide, please. Just a couple of hints as you think about potentially preparing a proposal for the IUSE program. I'm sure all of you have a good idea, so that's always the easy place to start, having a really good idea. That you then be able to communicate this idea clearly to the pool of reviewers who will be looking at your application. That you address the 2 merit review criteria that the National Science Foundation uses to assess every project, and those criteria are intellectual merit, or what are we going to learn, and broader impacts, essentially, who are we going to affect by the project. It's helpful to have the project state very clearly its objectives and questions, as well as any plans that the project may have for evaluation of project efforts. It's always a good idea to have plans for carrying out the work and to be able to give specific examples of how that's going to be accomplished. One of the most common criticisms that we get from our project reviewers is there really is not enough detail about what the project is actually going to do. So making sure that kind of detail is in a proposal can be really helpful as the proposal is being reviewed. We hope that you'll be able to ground a project in some relevant literature. So that often means doing a little bit of homework, reading what's happened in the field before, thinking about how you might apply those types of principles and understandings and expand on them in the type of work that you're trying to do at your own institution. In some cases, these references can be outside of STEM education. So there are lots of places to look for good ideas and sort of backing information that can help provide a rationale for doing a project. You also want to make sure that you've got the appropriate expertise on board, and that would include both within the principal investigator team, as well as anybody else associated with the project. And that might be senior personnel, advisory boards, consultants, other folks like that that can really help you achieve the goals that you're setting out to meet. And it's also very helpful to ask your colleagues inside and outside of your field to read your proposal and make sure that you've covered all the bases and haven't left any holes for someone to try to fill in as they're reading your proposal. Next slide, please. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Kaylin, who's going to tell you a little bit about the Advancing Innovation and Impact program.
All right, thank you, Ellen, and good afternoon to everybody. My name is Kaylin Owens, and I'm currently, like Ellen and Mike, serving as a program director at NSF in the Division of Undergraduate Education. But I'm from a two-year college, North Seattle College in Washington State, and my background is in chemistry and chemical education. I work on a number of programs at NSF, including IUSE that Ellen just talked about, but I'm also the lead of this program, Advancing Innovation and Impact in Undergraduate STEM Education at two-year institutions of higher education. This is a program specifically for two-year colleges, and as Ellen mentioned, it sort of grew out of the IUSE initiative. So both myself and my colleague Mike Davis will tell you just a little bit about this program. To start out with, we encourage, or the program encourages, bold, potentially transformative projects that fall under one of these four goals: to advance innovative and evidence-based practices in undergraduate STEM education at two-year colleges, enhance support for research development, implementation, and assessment to improve STEM education, address immediate challenges facing two-year colleges, and to support systemic approaches that advance inclusive and equitable STEM education practices. So, as also Ellen mentioned at the very beginning, this falls under what we call a program description. That's why there's the PD in front of the number there. So just briefly, and maybe we can advance the slide, next slide. A program description is more of a broad general description of programs, and it falls under just a funding mechanism that NSF uses to make awards. So the IUSE program has a solicitation, but the PD, this program that I'm talking about now, does not have a solicitation. So all the information that you need is actually found on the website about the program. So it's broad, it doesn't give a lot of specific guidelines. It's really open to the community to make, to submit proposals on a wide array of project topics. So very open in scope as well as in budget. And then there's also Dear Colleague letters, and these are just another funding mechanism that provide a way for NSF to seek proposals on a specific topic or issue. Next slide. In terms of approaches of interest that fall under this program, we hope to receive proposals that improve student outcomes in foundational STEM courses, broaden or create new STEM curricula, provide authentic research experiences or internships or other sorts of experiential learning opportunities, increase access to higher quality STEM education through new technologies or emerging scientific fields, as Ellen mentioned for IUSE, upskilling incompetent workers for new STEM jobs, building STEM career and transfer pathways, and developing novel mechanisms to identify talent and recruit into STEM programs. And in all cases, we encourage partnerships with both public and private entities to submit proposals. Next slide. And I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Mike Davis now.
Thank you, Kaylin. So as we are moving forward with this, one of the ways to think about the program description is sort of like a rather large open-ended assignment. And that means that the instructions for submitting a proposal are largely those that are laid out in the Proposal and Award Policies and Procedure Guide, or the PAPPG. So that is something that you would want to have handy and sort of like as a desktop icon while you're going through a process like this. While you're doing this, you want to make sure that you're building on fundamental or previously applied research, so that you've done the sort of the background research to make sure that you know what the field is saying about the area where you'd like to do this. You can do applied research. This is not required, but it can be supported. We do expect some sort of knowledge generation, and some of the things that Ellen referred to in the IUSE program as knowledge generation are things that would certainly apply here, either original research questions or looking at the evaluation of the project itself. And that this can result in a field-tested outcome and products that can enhance STEM teaching at two-year colleges, and that there should be a dissemination plan that will get this out into the world so that people can learn about it. Next slide, please. This is open to all institutions of higher education and associated organizations. So projects can focus on different time scales, so we're not restricted to, say, 2 years, 3 years, or so on. They can be near-term or long-term in the way they address challenges and opportunities. And they can range from small projects, things that are relatively exploratory, to things that are large and comprehensive. And what that means is that the budget should be commensurate with the scope and the scale of the proposed work. So probably a smaller budget for a smaller scale program and a larger budget for a larger scale program. There isn't a restriction on the budget in either of those capacities. One of the things that we often encourage people to do, if you have any questions about this, or you're thinking that you would like to develop this, please send us like a maximum of a 2-page project summary, and we'd be happy to discuss its scope within this project description or program description. We accept proposals at any time, which means that anytime prior to May 1st, 2023, we can accept a submission that is coming in. But because this is a target date, that means that we can even accept these after May 1st. So going past that date. So it's a target date, not a due date. That, I believe, takes us through everything. If we go to the next slide, we are thanking you for your interest in improving undergraduate STEM education.
Thank you so much, Ellen, Kaylin, Mike. We really appreciate it. So I'm going to stop sharing at this particular point, and then ask our colleagues basically that are giving our next talk. So Patrick, are you ready for me to pass it on to you? Thank you so much.
Sure thing. Thank you. Yes, I am Patrick Shabram at Front Range Community College, and I did want to start off with just a little bit of, can't advance. There you go. Just a little bit of background information on me. First of all, most importantly, is that prior to 2015, I had absolutely no experience with federal grants. So as I went through grad school, I had no experience. I had no idea that you could actually maybe get a grant to help you with your, to continue to pursue your education. I worked in private industry for a long time. Finally found my way back into academia, and it wasn't until a group of individuals at an NSF facility in Boulder was interested in actually working with with community colleges on some internship programs they were developing. And they realized that they really didn't know anybody who worked at community colleges as part of that. They sort of knew me. They had a little bit of introduction to me. So they reached out to me and asked if I could help partner with them. But I remember when they approached me and asked if I would be interested in working with them on a collaborative grant. And I thought that I would just be forwarding this on to the college administration, the grants writer. The grants writer asked me if I wanted to be a PI, and I didn't know what that meant. So that's how new I was when it actually was time, or when we actually did our first proposal. And I'm coming from this perspective. I'm guessing that there might be a few of you on this call who sort of have a similar background to me, and that is absolutely no experience working with these grants. Out of that first grant was a collaborative grant with UNAVCO. It was a GeoPass grant, which was an IUSE grant. That grant has been completed. And I don't believe GeoPass is any longer part of the IUSE program. At least we're on our second grant with that, and it's not part of IUSE. But then I have a second grant currently with, and that is an IUSE grant. And it's in its 5th year. So I know some of the terminology has changed, but it is an institution transformation type grant. And this is, again, a collaboration with the University of Texas, Rio Grande Valley. And for this grant, Front Range Community College is actually a sub-award under the University of Colorado Boulder, which I'm going to get into here in a second. It was my choice for our institution to be a sub-awardee under the University of Colorado, mostly because I was hoping, somewhat unsuccessfully, to maybe ease some of the administrative burden on me at the 2-year college. Didn't really work out that way, and I'm kind of a big fan of the collaborative grant versus being a sub-awardee, which I'll explain here in a second. But first of all, just some best practices. Read the solicitation carefully, and then read it again, because once you start putting things down on the paper, You're going to find that you get your ideas become better and better and better until the project has completely morphed into something that might not actually be following the solicitation very well. So it's always a good idea to sort of go back and check in with the solicitation. And be sure to be proposing something new. Don't try and get funding to continue a program that you've got at your institution. This is about trying something new. But I will also say, if it's too new, if it's, you keep in mind that there are reviewers on the other side of this. And if it's a project that is, doesn't have a lot of literature behind it, or isn't based in sort of the body of knowledge out there, then it might not actually get approved when it's going through its review. And then in support of that, do a thorough literature review. So try and support statements that you make in your proposal with something that is part of the literature that's out there. Now, a little bit about collaborations. I've mentioned before that one of the best ways to kind of get into your first grant is to have a collaboration. And there's a few reasons for that. First of all, it will allow you to leverage organizational experience. So if you can work with somebody or at an organization that has a lot more experience with NSF grants, then it's an opportunity for you to learn a lot, both about the proposal writing, but also about the implementation. The other thing, and this is something that I sort of learned, is that it gives you a little bit of credibility. So I feel as if I had approached my administrators with an idea for a proposal, they may not have taken it quite as seriously as they did when I was actually presenting it with UNAVCO, because in that case, we've got an NSF facility that's got some experience working with grants that's part of this project. And they're an employer. People graduate and go work for them, and they're part of the community. At least in our instance, they were part of the local community. So it sort of gave, the administrative really had to take sort of a close look at what I was proposing and ultimately support it. And then, of course, when it comes to dissemination, sometimes it helps to have education researchers as part of your team if you yourself have not had a lot of experience in this area. Now, I recommend working as a collaborative grant rather than a sub-awardee. And so in case you do not know what that is or the difference between the two, a collaborative grant would be when the two institutions each have their own grant, or the two or more institutions. So the grants are combined under an umbrella, under a project, but you each have your own budgets, you each submit your own annual report. In a way, it gives you a little bit more control over your particular part of the grant. A sub-award would be where another institution has the grant, a certain number of dollars are actually allocated for your institution as outlined in the budget. In the case of the grant, the current IUSE grant that I mentioned before, Front Range Community College sends an invoice to the University of Colorado, and then the University of Colorado compensates us for the work that we've done on that. So those are the differences between the two. But I would say that if you are applying for a grant, proposing a grant that would be benefiting students at a two-year college, that two-year college try and be the lead institution. So sometimes the four-year colleges and the two-year colleges have slightly different priorities, slightly different things in mind in terms of how to benefit students. And your the experts onto your college students. You should be the ones that the institution that's leading the grant. And if you're not the lead institution, I would encourage a collaborative grant rather than a sub-award. And since I have a limited amount of time to talk, if you want me to go into any more detail on why I believe in these components, please feel free to ask me when we do our breakouts on this. So if I could offer one piece of advice, the biggest one would be put in budget for an assistant. So if you are at a two-year college and you are putting in a proposal for a grant and you get the grant, you're going to find that you don't have a grants office the way that you thought you did. That you're going to have to learn to do things at your institution that you never knew you would have to learn to do. And sometimes you just don't know what you don't know. And we did put in budget for an assistant. In every grant that I've had an assistant as part of it. I know some colleagues who haven't put in an assistant, and it's really sort of they found that they really needed the help. And in a few cases, they've actually allocated some of their dollars towards having their assistant work with them on that, having my assistant actually work with them on their project, the assistant for my grants. So I can't stress that enough. Have some help as part of this. The other thing I would say is be wary of co-PI college administrators. So if you have a dean or a vice president at your college that wants to be a co-PI on the project, be careful about that. I've been at this institution 11 years and I've had 5 academic deans. So the turnover of administrators is a lot greater than it is with college faculty. And then I also find that our first grant had an administrator part of it. She really wanted to kind of take the project to a level that I wasn't comfortable taking it at, simply because it would have been a lot more work than I would have been able to accommodate as PI. I was foresightful enough to sort of put the kibosh on that a little bit, but by the time we actually received the award, she had left the institution. So just keep that in mind. Also, something that you'll find, and I think that if you surveyed 12 different faculty at two-year colleges that got a grant, 10 of them would probably say that one of the biggest issues was compensation, how they were compensated. Have an understanding of how you should be compensated. Do your research first. Find how most people are doing it in higher education, because there's a good chance that your college doesn't really have a good mechanism for actually compensating you as part of this. So you should sort of have an understanding of how you should be compensated, and that put that into your budget. And then the last thing I would say is recognize that the NSF is going to expect some flexibility along the way. You don't have to, write a good proposal, have it thought out, but you don't have to get everything exactly right in your proposal, because things change. Pandemics happen, right? You find that the schedule is just cannot be accommodated. So do recognize the fact that you do have some flexibility once you actually start in with your project. And hopefully I didn't go over my time. So that's it from my end. I look forward to talking with you some more if you have questions.
Thank you so much, Patrick. That was very informative, and thank you for being so honest and frank with your feedback. Colleagues need to hear that, basically. So next, I will segue to our colleague Rosa. Are you ready to share your slides? Thank you, Rosa.
I think you're on mute, Rose.
Thank you very much. I said I put a title here that said hard-won lessons from my first NSF IUSE grant, because I want to make sure everybody knows that I'm not the expert. And I also just really enjoyed the introduction, and also Patrick. And like he just said, you can talk to every faculty and they'll have a different experience. So I'll have some things that are a little different. So first, a little bit about my journey, and I'm going to just tell you quickly that I came back to the community college system because I basically, that's where I got my opportunities. I was born in Los Angeles, but I grew up in Mexico most of my teenage years and formative years. And I went to high school in Southern California, and I went to Pasadena City College. I saw Pasadena City College fly by in those introductions. So hello. I definitely feel like my formative years happened there, and all my opportunities after that came. I didn't know I could go to school after I went out of high school because I went straight into work, but thankfully Pasadena City College really changed my path. And so from Pasadena City College, I went to UC Riverside, and there I got my first research experience. And I had my first mentor at the community college, but my first research experience at UC Riverside, which then propelled me really into applying and being accepted into the best universities in the country, access to a lot of opportunities through, NIH. And then my heart pulled me back into the community college system because I wanted to be in education, but I didn't know anything about NSF or NSF grants. And that's a whole new learning experience, which I'll talk a little bit about it. But now where I am is at Clovis Community College. I teach biology. My background is in molecular biology, genetics, gene regulation. And one of the things that my life experience showed me is that if I had gotten that experience a little earlier, that would have changed my trajectory. And so I came back to see if I could somehow introduce research into the lower divisions, right? Community college is the first 2 years. So you're going to get students that are either high school dual enrollment, or you're going to get freshmen and sophomore. And so this is my little school. Right now, it's only 2 buildings. It's one of the newest community colleges in California. So in terms of the grant, a couple of things I wanted to make sure to remember to say is that my first submission was rejected. And we did this as a group. Not a group, but I collaborated with Carnegie Institution of Washington and Johns Hopkins University. So we have 3 PIs, and I am not the lead PI. We submitted, we got rejected. We spoke to the program officer. We reviewed all the comments from the reviewers, and it was really informative. So I wanted just to say it's that first rejection is just really important to kind of figure out whether what needs to change. Why was it rejected? And had lots and lots of conversations with different program officers. So some of the things that I would like to say about the process is what we found is that specific aims page was really critical. We send that around to lots of colleagues, lots of people willing to give us feedback, and just really made sure that it could stand on its own. Could I provide this one page to someone and they would really get an idea of what the project was aimed at, what we wanted to accomplish. How could we disseminate this? And just revised it many times. Rejection is redirection. So don't marry your proposal. Find out what's really needed. And actually, I say that because as we spoke to program officers, as we spoke to colleagues who were not part of this grant, but who had some expertise that they could share, we kind of found out what was most interesting and what was most feasible as we went, right? Because this is just a small starting project. Listen to your program officer. I put it down there so that I make sure that I make a point of it. We had a lot of great advice from different people. I went to several workshops and webinars because I just couldn't hear, I can't hear all the information at one time. I heard some things louder, in some of the webinars, and other things at other times. So it was good to get more input. We resubmitted and we got the grant the second time around. I just noticed I didn't quite tell you what it was, but I think I was trying to minimize that because I can spend a lot of time talking about that. But the basic idea is we wanted to bring genomics data science to undergraduate, to lower division education, because one of the things that I feel very strongly is that when students transfer to four-year schools and they're not integrated into that institution, that they have a couple of barriers of not finding where to find information, not having mentors that have research labs already in place, and giving them some of those skills, those critical skills before they transfer would change them. That was my idea. And so we do have some students now, and I'll put something in the chat box when I'm done to show you. We've developed a couple of options, course-based undergraduate research on genomics data science using single-cell RNA-seq data. And there's a lot of people that thought that was way too much, it was way too advanced. And we had a cohort of students who went through the process, and we have some nice data that we plan to share. But basically, here's one of the main takeaways that I want you to know that I learned. Number one is I did not know that I was going to have to know so many people in my institution. I had no idea that that it was going to matter so much, because I was used to NIH grants, which is really kind of different in terms of like the lab is the center. Now that I'm at a community college, there is, there's just so much that I wasn't familiar with. So the department, like, can I get my faculty in my department, kind of share with them what am I doing? How does this affect our department? Why is this good? Why is it good for the students? Why is it good for our department? Administration, who, has also other pressures about enrollment and what classes are going to have the most students, and what classes are impacted, and where should I be in a class that has 8 students that are interested in research versus a class that is oversubscribed. So there's a lot of things that you have to, be aware that you need to work at getting these people on board. Patrick mentioned about sub-awards. I was a sub-award, and I did it for exactly the same reasons. I wanted less responsibility. I didn't know how to run all these things. And both the other 2 institutions had people who had a little more well, a lot more knowledge, and I figured I could learn as I go. And I think it depends, I guess the experience depends on who ends up being your lead institution or the people that you're interacting with, because for me, it actually turned out exactly like I wanted. So in the first part of the grant, I had a smaller budget, and also a lot less responsibility in terms of, what do I need to do administratively? So I got some time to just sort of like step back a little bit from the IRB for a little while. I got to step back on some of the budget things that I didn't know what to do. But anyway, I kind of grouped them in 3 places: administration, my faculty, the finance office to produce to help me with the budgets, grants office, really, really important, institutional research, which helps me put the surveys into the classroom, have to have somebody come and help, and then provide me the de-identified data. And one that I didn't know I needed was the web developer, social media, and marketing in the school. Both just to show that this has been a good investment for the NSF, because really it's been really a great thing for my school. And I'm going to have all this open educational research information that I can share with other community colleges, and especially the ones in my district who I can actually go in person and help. So I think I might have come into this a little bit, but I definitely benefited from not being the lead. So it has to be the institution that was my partners in this were just understood my role and understood that I was in charge of managing and directing the area that I was. We together talked to our program officer when we had to change some things around because of the pandemic. And so we were able to do that. We were able also to request for a supplement, and we talked together with the program officer, and basically almost about 80% of the supplement came to my community college rather than to the lead institution, because that's where the money was needed to produce what we needed to produce. So I think it has a lot to do with that kind of dynamic, just like anything else. It's the other main thing, and I'm not sure how I'm on time, but Patrick also mentioned this core, how are you gonna support yourself? How is your effort going to be funded? And you can request course release, and some of you might know there's some politics about that, and it could be a difficult ask, but it's definitely worth asking and just sort of justifying. And but it can be very expensive, at least in California, the way it works in terms for the grant. You can also work overload, which can be stressful and will eat into your personal life a lot. So, but these are the 2 main ways, and I have found ways to do both. And so I think I might just wanted to give some acknowledgements on, like I said, all the people that actually ended up being involved in this process. So I made collaborations in the school. So the things that some of the NSF grant wasn't covering that my students needed, there was other programs on campus, and that could do that. And so we were able to accomplish a lot more. So not only by listening to the program officer, but also by listening to the school administrators and the direction that the school is taking, and the new areas that are opening up, and then just trying to figure out and remembering, at least for me, is the student and students, not only mine, but those in community colleges are the people that I'm trying to benefit in the end. So how can I get all these well-intended people who might have like opposite demands and on how they think the time and money should be used, and then trying to figure out what can I practically accomplish. And so I'm really excited to be here. I learned something from the introduction already, and about new programs and other things that I haven't even looked into. And I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rosa. We really appreciate your presentation, and thank you so much for just the real life experience that you gave. You know, in terms of applying, not being successful, coming back in, resubmitting, just to encourage others in the community. If Eric, if we could move to your presentation next, and
You
then
bet.
thank you.
Thanks so much. So I'm Eric Bear. I'm at Highline Community College in Washington State, and I've been a PI on several IUSE proposals or IUSE projects, as well as am a co-PI on a PD 217918. Did I get it right, Kaylin? The 2-year college one. Anyway, and some other projects as well. So a few lessons that I've learned from being involved in multiple IUSE grants and other NSF grants is, first one, you've heard it already, reach out to your program officer before, while, etc. And I actually really appreciated once I found this email template, and I really appreciated having something like this. And you can get the slides so you can get this, but basically, dear whichever program officer I'm considering submitting to, tell them where you're submitting to, because a lot of them do oversee multiple programs. Then give a few paragraphs, couple paragraphs, don't go too far, but a couple paragraphs on what you want to do, what the intellectual merit and broader impacts might be, a little bit about your background. Ask them to discuss or give you feedback. Ask the questions that you might have. What counts as a community college? I saw it come up in the chat, those sorts of things. And then let them know how to get a hold of you so you can have a conversation. I think those can be really, really helpful. And then once you do get that feedback and have that conversation, write a thank you note. Keep those conversations going, because boy, no one can be more helpful than program officer. So that's the first thing. The other thing is, I've worked with a lot of faculty from different community colleges, and I am always shocked at how every community college is really different, and you're going to have to figure out how to negotiate your system. Every time I think I understand something, I find somebody else in a very different place. Some of you will have great grants offices that will be really helpful and maybe do a lot of the sort of nuts and bolts work of getting proposals. Others, you may have to do everything yourself, or even teach them how to do things. Or maybe you don't even have a grants office. So it's really variable. So I would say this for advice coming from me, and I don't think Patrick and Rosa would mind, but saying what we say, understand that you've got to figure out how it's going to work in your situation. And your situation is probably different than ours. One great thing to find out is if someone else from your institution has already had an NSF grant, because they've probably figured out some of these things before. And so figure that out and see if you can get by. And obviously, if you've already had one, you know these things. One of the harder lessons I ever learned, and it was actually the first one I was first NSF project I was on. Make sure you really want to do the project. Don't chase money. You will end up spending a lot of time doing stuff you don't want to do, and you won't do well. And it's yeah, that was my bad, and I don't recommend it. In a lot of programs, especially IUSE and PD 21, the two-year college program description, it's pretty easy, I think, to figure out some broader impacts. It's sometimes a little harder to figure out the intellectual merit. And so think about that from the get-go. How is this going to push things forward? What greater understanding will there be from your project? I find that in a lot of projects that I have been a part of, but also that I've seen and from others, it's a harder lift. And so starting to think about that earlier. I guess one other thing that I would say is that if an NSF project is a very large scale, typically multi-year thing, and if you can find a way of getting started on it without all the overhead of writing a proposal and the administration of a proposal, that's a really good thing, and you should do that, whether that's your college's foundation or some other pot of money. Not only that, but what it does is it allows you to get some basic information and data to see if it'll work, that if you're ready then to expand it, you can go to NSF with. And I think that is nice. You know, I think when you do the proposals, they say that it takes on average about 120 hours of work to complete a proposal. It's probably more for some, less for some others, but it's a lot of work. And so if there are easier sources, by all means. I have found it so helpful to talk to evaluators early on. Think about exactly how will you know if your project is successful or not? What will you measure to tell you, and how will you know whether or not you're successful or not, or whether you've answered the questions that you've answered, or that sort of thing. Talking to a professional evaluator early, I have found so helpful. A good evaluator can ask you probing questions that will clarify things and really do a lot for you. And then I also, for me, again, this is different for different people, sketching out a budget is really helpful for me because it gets me to think about what I actually want to do, how I want to spend the money. And that includes your time, which Rosa talked about and Patrick talked about as well. Like, okay, I want to do these things. How much time is that going to take? And how do I manage to get that time with the money that is going to come from NSF if this is funded? How much do I need to, to run this workshop or to find participants, all that sort of stuff. I think sometimes I get lost in the ideas, and the budget always brings me out into thinking about what I want to do. And that's a good thing. So those are some of the lessons learned. I do want to reiterate a couple things that everyone has said. Read the solicitation before. I think Patrick said before and during, and I would say before, during, and at the end, because I have gone back like a day or two before submission, reread the solicitation, went, oh my goodness, we didn't put that in, and always great. I have found it's important. The PA-PPG is really important. Having someone on your team that knows the PA-PPG and could say, oh yeah, you need to do that and you need to do that is really, really helpful. Because frankly, it's a long document. And if you're constantly and you're going to need to refer to it a lot. And for someone that sort of says, oh yeah, look in that section, it's really useful. Just nice practical thing. And so those are the things that I have to share. I got the nice, because Patrick and Rosa going first, they took care of a lot of the stuff I would have said otherwise. I can't disagree with anything. So.
Thank you, Eric. That was super amazing. So now at this point, we're going to move into breakout sessions, and we're kind of going to do this two ways. So for those that are interested in speaking with our colleagues from NSF, program directors, program officers, stay here in the main room if you have questions for them, basically. And I see there are a few questions coming through in the chat, so I'll try to make sure that I segue those to the right individuals and ask them to respond. And then if you would like to engage more with one of our speakers or someone who is interested in some of the remarks, the comments that our speakers gave, please feel free to join their particular breakout room. And then so I believe, let me go back through and see if we had any questions that are directly hanging. Okay, so thank you so much, Thomas. So go ahead and feel free to join the breakout room as you prefer. So, like I said, basically, if you would want to speak to our speakers more, so Eric, Rosa, Patrick, feel free to join those particular rooms. I will go back and review the chat and see if there are any questions that weren't answered. So it looks like we had a few questions about review panels. If you have that question, I would recommend you stay here in the main room and speak to our colleagues at NSF. Um, let me see if there were any other pressing questions that seem like they weren't responded to. Oh, okay. Alrighty. So we'll come back together after our breakouts. I see people are already joining basically to kind of close out. And then Ellen, Kaylin, Mike, do you all have any preference about the way people ask questions in this main session? Is it okay for them to just unmute and ask questions? Do you want questions in the chat? Any preference? Ellen, I can't hear you because you're on mute. No problem. It happens.
Someday I'll learn how to use Zoom.
Okay.
I'm going to say we can do a combination of things. We can go ahead and start with the questions that are in the chat. And then folks who have questions can go ahead and raise their hands. And maybe we can even alternate going back and forth between chat and live questioning. And I think Mike and Kaylin and I will try to tag team and hopefully give you a reasonable answer for the questions that you are asking.
Great. So I'm going to monitor the chat, but we had one colleague. So Mary raised her hand. If you could please ask your question.
Okay.
Hey, y'all, excuse me. I have a cold, so I'm a little scratchy. But I am asking about, I have colleagues, I work in our grants office at Georgia State University's Perimeter College, which is the 2-year college that's embedded within the larger university. And I have colleagues who are both working on IUSE proposals and working on advancing innovation proposals. We have told them, as we have been told from y'all, that advancing innovation grew out of IUSE and that it's a kind of a 2-year college version. Is there a way to distinguish or help faculty members understand when it might be better for a project to apply for advancing innovation over IUSE or IUSE over advancing innovation? Particularly because some of our faculty, being new to grant writing, are a little intimidated actually by the very open-ended call that advancing innovation has. And so we've been very detailed in our working with them, but just wondering from y'all's perspective if you have any feedback on that.
Caitlin, you want to handle this one? You want me to jump in?
Sure, I can start. You know, it's difficult to just, depending on your project, you would pick one over the other. And in many cases, what you're proposing would fit in both. And so you just have to go with, you know, what, you know, or it might kind of depend on, you know, what funding level you're seeking. So that would be probably the biggest criteria. There's a lot of overlap. But again, the 2-year college PD is very specifically designed with, you know, achieving impact at 2-year colleges. So it's a great option that it's out there at the moment for 2-year colleges. So I think at this time, it's a great option. And, you know, so you're competing with other 2-year colleges in that particular program, although there is, it is open to all institutions, so that's a little confusing, but the vast majority of proposals that come into the PD are coming from 2-year colleges. So that's not a great response, or it's not definitive. It's a little bit of a gray area response, but you know, again, check your funding levels, what you're seeking, what you're trying to do, and go from there. I don't know if Ellen has any other words of advice there.
Yeah, I mean, as has been mentioned several times, the two programs are very enjoined and intertwined with each other. And so the Advancing Innovation project or program really has grown out of what we see as a need in the IUSE program to specifically focus on community colleges. I do think that there's room for proposals from community colleges, certainly in either of the programs, and it really does depend on the type of project that you're trying to do and the emphasis and focus that you have. As Caitlin mentioned, you will probably be reviewed more in alignment with 2-year colleges in the Advancing Innovation program, whereas if you're in IUSE, you're going to be reviewed probably a little bit more dependent on the disciplinary area that you're interested in and the type of project you're doing. And so you may end up in a review panel that's going to be assessing both 2-year college projects and 4-year college projects, for example. That's not necessarily a bad thing, because it can really put you in an area where if it's, you know, if the project is centered in a very specific discipline, that can almost be to your advantage, because you're going to get reviewers that are very disciplinarily oriented. Whereas if you are just in a pool with, you know, a bunch of the impact projects, the disciplinary expertise may be a little bit more broad. And so you may not get someone quite as focused in that area, but it's really up to you. And it's really up to how you structure and design the project as to where you think it's going to fit best. My advice is read both, read the program description and read the solicitation, and see which one you think you can actually work with the best in terms of how you're putting your ideas together.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Okay, so now I will actually read to you all 2 questions from the chat. You can see whether how you would like to respond to these. So the question is, as a PD option doesn't have a set deadline, are proposals reviewed on a rolling basis? How long after submission is a notification? And the second question is, so they have a question about independent evaluation on a project with an advisory board. And then they want to know, how should they do a collaborative inquiry? How to approach that basically, and then the evaluation of it. So, and I don't want to butcher your name, but I'm going to pronounce it the best I can. I think that it's Iglila, and forgive me if I haven't said it right. Maybe you want to unmute yourself and kind of clarify this question, because I'm not sure if this is clear to our program directors, because it's a little bit unclear to me. So maybe I'll let you all respond to either one of those.
Yeah, let's go ahead and start with the review process and the deadlines, because I think that's an easy one to answer.
Sure.
And then maybe we can do this one, it's a little bit more involved.
Yeah, can I jump in on
Mike, do you want to go for? Yeah.
Yeah, so basically, yes, they come in on a rolling basis. And so what we look for is a certain number of proposals that make sense to put a panel together for. And when we have whatever that number is, then we try and hold a panel. Generally speaking, for programs with deadlines, it's about 6 months. So 6 months to get 75% of those proposals all the way through a complete process. So you can look at just something like 6 months. So once these come in, it's not they'll immediately go to a panel. We are waiting for like a certain mass of them to come in for a panel. Still, if you, a 6 month window makes sense for a lot of that to happen. You want to
Thank
move on to
you.
the next question in that group?
Yes, our colleague that gave the question in the chat, would you like to clarify your question? Thank you.
Yeah. I can go ahead. Hello, my name is Iglika, and I posted 2 or 3 questions, and they're all interrelated actually. And it's about so we have a project that's under participatory action research, so it's very collaborative. We designed it from the beginning collaboratively, and we bring in people, students and faculty to collaborate in the design of the project, but also in the kind of evaluation slash research of the project. And so one issue that's been raised is the issue of, and we are going to have an advisory board. So we are aware that we need external kind of like evaluation and advice. However, there's this issue that's raised that a lot of time there might even be a requirement for an independent or external, sometimes the word external is used, but some other NSF officers have explained that that's an independent evaluator. But we currently have the design that the person that's one of the people of the 5 PIs on the project from the 5 different institutions, that they would be managing the evaluation of the project under participatory action research. And so I know that a lot of projects are not PAR, so we just didn't know what we should think about it. We are applying for level 1, so it's a smaller award. And should we budget for an external evaluator, as some are recommending here? And also related question was about advisory board. And again, this issue of having kind of an external versus internal advisory. Thank you.
Well, project evaluation in IUSE programs can take a lot of different forms, and you've already mentioned basically 3 here. So it can be a member of the project team with expertise in evaluation. It can be an advisory board that's providing guidance and evaluation, or advice as the project goes along, or it can be an external evaluator. The real critical element is that you sort of fit in both ongoing or formative evaluation and summative evaluation. That you don't make this basically a one point in the project where you're going to have an evaluator involved. That you figure out how the project can have sort of ongoing evaluation activities, just to make sure it's on track, make sure the research questions are aligning with the data that's being collected, the assessments are all exactly what you want them to be, and that they're meeting the demands of the project, and that you're actually on track to do the project as you'd like. So IUSE is very flexible about what that evaluation or who that evaluation can be performed by. It doesn't have to be any one of those 3, or it can be a combination of the expertise that you need. For level 1s, if you have an advisory board in place and they've got the right expertise, then that to me would seem like that's a reasonable way to start the project evaluation. If you're working with a larger project where it's more involved, maybe you've got a couple of campuses, lots of moving parts, having an external evaluator who can sort of keep track of all of those issues might make a little bit more sense, but it really depends on your individual project.
Okay, thank you. So it's not an issue, because for some people it's kind of almost like a flag that a member of one of the PIs would be managing the evaluation, and we all together participate with an advisory board. That's not immediately a red flag.
It's not immediately a red flag, and in some cases that's the way the institutions are set up, where it's there's a requirement that if it's someone who works at the institution, they be part of the PI team. I mean, if you're worried about it looking like it's too close to the carrying out of the project or the execution of the project, you might consider making that person senior personnel rather than a member of the PI team. And that gives a little bit of separation. But I think in practice, they're going to be doing the same thing, no matter where their name is on the masthead.
Yeah, in our case, it's one of the 5 people who have conceived the project. And so they're one of the submitting collaborative PIs.
Well, I think, writing in your project description why this person is the best person to carry out the evaluation, that's a good way to address that immediately. That's a sort of an acknowledgement that you understand the role of this person and you understand how they're going to fit into the project.
Thank you.
Thank you. So at this point, we don't have any additional questions in the chat, so we're open for questions. Or if you would like to raise your hand, feel free to do either one. Yes, go ahead, since there are no other questions.
We've been working on our grant, that's all I can say. There's 5 of us, I speak on behalf of 5. We had a question whether for a level 1, I know it's usually larger projects have multiple collaborators, but the very design of our project is that we want to bring diversity of opinions and perspectives early before the project grows. So that's why we have 5 collaborating institutions. Is that going to raise concerns for a level 1 project, as long as, of course, our budget is well explained and our project and all that good stuff?
Yeah, it's basically going to depend on your explanation and why this project makes sense the way you've put it together. So I think if you can justify that and it's appropriate for the project you're doing, then it's not going to be a problem. But I think it has to be clear to the reviewers why you have all these pieces and why that makes sense. I also want to point out that if you have additional questions specifically about the IUSE program, we do have office hours tomorrow afternoon. So we have an office hours scheduled about every 4 weeks. And the next one happens to be tomorrow at 3 p.m. So I will be there and we'll have at least one other program officer on board to answer additional questions.
Thank you. We were here because half of us are community college. So we were wanting to see how that plays with the community. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you, Ellen, for saying that. So there was another question in the chat about are the deadlines going to be the same every year? January, July, May, for example. And then the question about how do you get registered for the office hours? Let me basically go to the NSF website and see if I can find that quickly and put that in the chat. Oh, okay.
Mike's got you on that one.
Thank you. What?
Yeah, there's no registration for office hours. There's just a Zoom link and you can come in. Well, basically the way office hours works is we do a 5-minute, very quick overview of the program, and then we open the floor to questions. The deadlines are as published. I will say that it probably makes sense to check the program websites relatively frequently, just to see that the deadlines are still in the same place, because they do move around occasionally. And the reason they move is typically to help NSF meet their internal workload needs, and not necessarily, that we're doing this just to stymie the community. We've changed the deadline on you all of a sudden. That we really do have reasons why we have to move these deadlines on occasion.
I would just add, Ellen, that keep an eye, if you're interested in the PD, just keep an eye on the website for any potential changes. PDs are not meant to stay around, they don't stay around a long time. So just keep an eye on the website for any sort of updates or changes to that program.
Thank you so much, Kevin. Also, so now we have 2 colleagues that have raised their hands. I'm just going to go in order. So I believe Chantal, you first, and then I'll go to Lisa.
Hi, thank you. Good afternoon. I'm at the Queensborough Community College. So the difficulty that I have is I have an idea about Makerspace, and I don't know if I should apply for an IUSE or go for the advance, and whether I know you mentioned that it might be better as a community college to apply for the program that's specifically targeting community colleges, because then we'll be probably evaluated on that a lot more than to probably compete with some of the 4-year colleges with the IUSE. So I was just wondering in terms of, I don't know, I guess the kind of projects, or should I maybe send maybe the 2-pager to both programs to figure out which one would be the best?
That's certainly a possibility. Yeah, you can send it. I mean, you're looking at Kaylin and you're looking at me, and the 2 of us can probably just we'll sort it out between the 2 of us who might be the best program to take a look at it for you.
Okay then, thank you.
Yeah, I mean, like Ellen mentioned before, the reviewers are likely to have more expertise in 2-year colleges, or that doesn't mean that IUSE doesn't have reviewers from 2-year colleges. They do, but it's more likely to have a panel of reviewers from 2-year colleges that know the context well.
Okay, good, thank you.
Although I will also say that IUSE has funded, some work in the makerspace area. So there have definitely been IUSE projects that have looked at that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Lisa, can we take your question now, please?
You can, as soon as I figure out how to unmute and turn my video on. Sorry.
It's okay.
So my question is maybe a little more sort of philosophical or sort of cultural. So I'm at Daytona State College in Florida, and we have applied for IUs in the past and not been funded. We have had a few other NSF grants, and we actually spent some time developing a proposal for the innovative grant 2 years ago when it first came out, and ended up not applying. Part of what I seem to, so I'm the director of the grants office, and what I keep running into, I think more so with our STEM faculty than other faculty, is just a lack of time. And some of that is sort of the institutional move. I don't know if that's quite the right word, but these people are just completely overloaded with teaching responsibility, even more so than a, sort of traditional community college, 10 courses a year. The STEM folks are just constantly teaching overload after overload after overload. So to take on a grant, I think one of the speakers actually mentioned this, that decision point of, do you take release time versus overload? There's no easy answer to that here. But generally speaking, people can make more money, and the work itself is more comfortable to them to do overload versus take on a brand new grant project, especially if they've never directed a grant project or been part of a grant project. We've had some folks who have been enthusiastic. They tend to be the same small group of people. So then they get, burned out on other grant projects. So I guess my question really is, are you seeing any trends nationally that would suggest the over-reliance on full-time faculty, and sort of as partner to that, increasing reliance on adjunct faculty who have really little connection to the institution and who have no motivation to join a grant project because they don't even know if they'll be here a semester from now? Are there any trends around participation and faculty seeking these kinds of grants that might sort of help me understand the phenomenon that we're seeing internally?
Things that I've been seeing in various proposals highlight exactly what you're talking about. How do we find people who are going to be able to do this? And it comes up a lot in the discussions that we have prior to these coming out. And you're describing a situation that I'm really familiar with.
Mm-hmm.
The college I came from in Florida was a college that hadn't really had cost of living allowances for quite some time. And so the only way to actually give yourself that cost of living allowance was to teach another class, and then to teach another class. And in giving up any of that, if people are talking about release time, what they're really releasing themselves from is their overload.
Mm-hmm.
So they're not getting back to a base load and creating more hours in the day to get this job done.
Right.
What we are, and we haven't seen a growing reliance on adjunct faculty, because in decreasing enrollments, it's actually classes that might have been taught by part-timers are now subsumed by more full-timers. And so it's not like there's a whole bunch of more part-timers available to do this work. But that picture is going to vary across colleges.
Mm-hmm.
A question we get asked a lot, and we don't always have a great answer for, is how do I get the release time to do this? And we really try to give institutions a lot of opportunities to say how they're going to support the time for whoever is going to do this project at the institution. And we really want to empower the institutions to think creatively about how that time is going to be created and how that time is going to be compensated. Per some of Patrick's responses earlier on, like, people really do need to think about how their time is going to be covered. Kaylin, if you want to, do you have anything you want to add on that?
I just would say that conversations internally at NSF, since I've been here at NSF, have been kind of looking at the two-year college issues with getting the work done and having the support through NSF funding to do the work that needs to get done. The models that are set up for four-year universities are not always effective at two-year colleges. And I think that there's an awareness of that at this time, that some of those policies need to shift a little bit in order to accommodate some of the challenges that two-year colleges face, and faculty's time is just high on that list of things to be thinking about. So I would say that we're having conversations about that, and that there's a number of programs and things like the PD that are coming out to address some of those challenges. And then I guess I would just say with the pandemic that absolutely faculty time has just really been challenging to find in order to engage in this work. So hopefully we're in a position where we're coming out of that with a lot of new ideas and new directions and new challenges and opportunities to engage in this work and to support students. So I don't know if I added a whole lot to that, but but we're definitely thinking about that here at NSF.
Thank you all for those comments. I appreciate it.
Thank you. So we have two last questions. So I'll thank again our colleagues at NSF for staying with us for so long. So I'll ask first the one that came through in the chat. So a colleague, Denise, asked, okay, we're trying to get release time plus a summer stipend. They want to know if IUSE will fund that basically for a 2-year college. Is that allowable?
Well, the general NSF guideline is that the IUSE program, or NSF as a whole, will fund no more than 2 months of full-time faculty time. That being said, there certainly are exceptions to that rule, and the community college space is one area where that exception is probably going to be taken much more seriously, because the structure really is not the same as a 4-year institution where the funding model makes more sense. If there's justification for release time plus additional salary, that should be stated in a proposal. And there's actually a section of the proposal in the facilities, equipment, and resources page where those kinds of obligations can be outlined, and the rationale for why additional salary would be needed to make this particular project roll. And so I think that's a really that should be taken advantage of. That's the kind of things, think creatively about how much you would need to support a salary and how you're actually going to get that kind of money, and whether that can be fit within the sort of structured or semi-structured guidelines that NSF issues for faculty salaries.
And then we're going to end basically with our last question. Again, forgive me if I'm pronouncing your name wrong, but I believe it's Parag. If you could ask your question and just try to keep it to about 30 seconds, because we really only have a minute left. Thank you.
Thank you, Chantal. So I'm at Middlesex College in New Jersey, and my background is biology, but I've moved into sustainability sciences. So my question is very simple. I've been able to scrounge some petty money, small grants, and I have built a hobby greenhouse that I show sustainable agriculture practices. Can I use NSF, IUSE, and the community college grant to build a proper infrastructure for a greenhouse, etc.? Can that be a valid proposal?
Can you clarify what you mean by infrastructure? Are you talking about physical?
Right now, I have been able to show small studies by doing research with 1 or 2 students every semester for the last 4 semesters, using a small hobby greenhouse where I use solar panels, wind turbines to run hydroponics in a greenhouse as a sustainable agriculture practice. So for our sustainability program, it's a hands-on activity, but also it's an opportunity for students to do independent research. But if I want to expand this, I need to invest and look for funding that will allow me to put a proper greenhouse, which is not a makeshift sort of greenhouse that falls apart every 2 semesters.
Yeah, that's sort of a tricky question, I think. Certainly IUSE grants do allow for materials costs and support costs like that, but it has to be directly related to student education, and you have to show that it's going to be clearly used for, the student education purposes. The problems that I've seen when requests like that come in through review panels is sustainability. How is this structure going to be maintained over the long term? is an institution willing to pick up maintenance costs on it? Is there some way to make sure that if investment is made using NSF money, that activities will be able to be continued after the award is ended?
Okay.
So those types of things really need to be thought about very carefully. And I would guess there has to be some pretty serious institutional buy-in to support, commitment to support this once the award has been completed.
So how do you document that?
I would use your facilities, equipment, and resources section to do that.
The institutional buy-in.
Well, you can certainly get a letter of collaboration from institutional authorities that have the ability to guarantee some sustainability.
Okay.
Or to provide you with avenues that you would be able to tap into to help sustain this over the long term.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Alrighty, so thank you everyone. We are 2 minutes over. I just want to very quickly close out to thank all of our speakers. So Patrick, Eric, Rosa, we so appreciate your candid feedback, your experience, just telling us about how you came into the IUSE community and how you were successful with receiving your grant funding. I really want to thank Ellen, Kaylin, Mike for being here, giving your NSF insight. For those, if you have more questions, sorry, we ran out of time as usual. Please join the office hours and engage with the program officers again at this time. And please, we're asking you if you could please fill out the survey. Let us know if you like this webinar so we can do more of them, and just tell us more about what you would like to see in the IUSE community. So thank you. Have a really good day. Take good care.